Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining me in this session about the weakest link in your privacy program, employees or vendors. My name is Esperanza Ventura. I am Solutions Engineer at OneTrust. I'm also Country Offering Manager for the Iberian region, and this is the agenda that I prepared for today. I will start by talking about some of the events that have shaped privacy in the recent years. I will then focus on the risk posed by third party and also employees, and we will review some of the operational aspects that we will take into account in order to avoid or perhaps mitigate them if they arise. Now, with no further ado, let's have a look at the historical context and its impact on privacy. It's been almost 3 years since GDPR became effective. Since then, we've seen many organizations with more mature privacy programs, following these requirements from GDPR. We've also seen that they have put into place internal processes, for example, privacy by design, or the creation of privacy champions that will advocate for privacy within the organizations. Also, we've seen a lot of collaboration between different departments. Also, as a consequence of GDPR, we see that privacy is not just now a matter for privacy experts. It has also widespread the awareness to not only within our organization but also to the citizens. It's what we call the cookie effect. Almost everybody is aware about the cookie consent and is expecting also companies to request it. So it's widening or spreading privacy across other sectors, or other stakeholders rather than privacy experts. On the other side, in July 2020, the Court of Justice of the European Union declared null and void the adequacy of the protection afforded by the EU-US Privacy Shield. And with this, there has been a big focus on the data processors, not only on data controllers, as there was up until GDPR became effective, but also on our vendors, on our third parties. And also, we can add here that there's more and more reliance on the cloud, on using third-party systems that are in the cloud, and this requires a more complex control as well, because it will awaken more risk as well. And I will comment some of those shortly. And then, as well, around the pandemic of COVID-19, a lot of employees have started working from home. Those that can, of course, do so, and this has also awakened some concerns around privacy, around security, and also, as I was saying before, privacy now is not only a matter of the privacy team, but also now it's being taken into consideration in other departments like HR, for example, or sales, marketing, customer success, customer support, for example. Now, let's have a look at some of the risks presented by our vendors as the processors of our data and our employees. The truth is that nowadays, third-party risk management is not only linked to the field of security, to a large extent it is, but also we are also conditioned by new technologies. More and more companies are adopting cloud solutions, as I was saying before. They are involving third parties to manage parts of their business or administration. And since our information is managed externally, this can increase the risks to our organization. And secondly, data breaches continue to increase, and privacy incidents are increasingly in the media. In many cases, breaches occur because of an incident with a vendor, a third party, and this makes that for us to have an effective incident management program, we should have or take into account also our vendors or processors. And finally, failing to manage our suppliers effectively can lead also to severe consequences. Data breaches are receiving increased coverage in the media, and the consequences for our organizations can be severe. I'm not only referring to fines by data protection authorities, but perhaps also, more importantly, is the damage to a company's reputation in the long term. And as a result of this, we require solutions that take these challenges into account and that allow us both the security and the privacy of our suppliers to be assessed. Many organizations are also experiencing different challenges, the ones that we see on the screen, for example, the proliferation of data that is increasing exponentially in volume, and also identifying what information each vendor or what systems or processes are involved in becoming in this data processing, and this is becoming increasingly difficult to manage. As also, if we don't have our contracts and the data processing agreement in order, we can't attribute responsibility, for example, in the event of a data breach. And the result of this is an increased risk for our organization. And in case for example, we are audited by a data protection authority and we can't prove our compliance, we run here the risk of being fined. As for the potential disconnect with supplier, if we don't have contact details up to date, we will struggle to find perhaps the right people to respond and validate privacy assessments, for example. Or even worse, if an incident were to occur, we wouldn't have the right contact in hand to carry out necessary mitigation or the audit management measures. In terms of ongoing monitoring, we need to be aware of our suppliers and the suppliers that our suppliers are using, those so-called third-party suppliers, and whether they are in the scope of our privacy program. We need to have a process for our suppliers to report data breaches that affect us, so we can also take the appropriate action. In short, if we don't address these challenges, we are leaving our organization exposed to a greater risk. We're creating more workload, and we're also limiting the insights of our own data. And this brings us to what we call the Excel hell, that perhaps many of you are familiar with. From OneTrust, we see that many companies, no matter what size, large or small, are handling or trying to manage the challenges I mentioned before based on Excel sheets. For the record, I have nothing against Excel. And Excel can handle whatever you need, whatever you want. You can put a lot of data there, you can create many columns, etc. But the problem arises when it comes to keeping them alive. Vendor management is something that is constantly changing, it's evolving with our business, and we must monitor the third parties we work with throughout the whole life cycle of the data that we share with them. And Excel might work initially, but in the long term, it falls short. Inevitably, many companies today require tools that will help them manage tasks in a flexible way, that can facilitate vendor evaluations or assessments, that automate parts of the processes and perhaps offer reminders, notifications, and the long, etc. After looking at the main risks posed by third parties, let's turn now to another link of our privacy program that has been weakened as a result of the current pandemic. And this is our employees and the rise of remote work. This new way of working has brought a change in mentalities, a cultural change in a way we approach work. And in this regard, I wanted to comment this graph from a research done by the Stanford Institute for Economic Policy Research. And this was done at the end of June last year, in which we can see that, for example, 42% of respondents work from home full-time. This is almost twice as many employees who work from offices. That 26% of employees who will still commute to their place of work includes, of course, essential healthcare, food and retail workers, all those whose employments or whose tasks cannot be done from home full time. And then we see another third of the surveyed population that is unfortunately unemployed and has the most negative phase of the crisis. If we compare these percentages with the pre-pandemic studies, we can see that this has been an extraordinary change in this area. Remote working adds additional complexity to privacy and to security management. As far as we can see, this is not a temporary trend. Many companies are considering implementing it on a permanent basis. Others are considering offering a mixed environment, and more are possible formulas that are emerging. In the screen, we see three different approaches. One side, organizations such as HubSpot that propose the option of continuing to go to the office, working remotely, or perhaps a hybrid combination with flexible policies to make this possible. Other companies are reinventing the workspace and exploring alternative locations so the employees can take advantage of new opportunities outside their usual environment. And then the third example would be a virtual office where the office experience is recreated through avatars, virtual rooms, and the employees log into these rooms for each meeting with always the camera on for a greater interaction. Regardless of how your company is currently adjusting policies to accommodate remote working, they all raise privacy issues that require an appropriate strategy. And apart from remote working, there are other elements that can also impact the privacy and security assurance and that are closely related to employees. On one hand, technology. Here it's important to adapt the hardware and software to the specific needs of each employee's role, and on the other hand, to also ensure the availability of the connection points. It's also essential to emphasize processes, especially those that have to do with access to information, access to file storages, access to systems, points of contacts, and the frequency of collaboration, for example. And perhaps we might find that we need to adjust them or even replace them for other more secure and even simpler processes. And then finally, we must not forget the people themselves. Each individual that we employ presents additional challenges that we must recognize and can expose us to a greater vulnerability. An employee who is unaware of their impact, the impact of their actions that might have on privacy or on security, this can become a real issue. I can think, for the example of a sales executive editing information of a customer in a CRM, or perhaps someone scheduling a marketing campaign. This leads to the need to invest in training for employees so we can ensure that our own privacy and security policies. Now let's move to see some operational aspects to solve all these challenges that I just mentioned. It is key to have tools that facilitate our work with the automation of assessments, in this case, for example, focus on third-party risk management, and that can allow a continuous update of our inventory of processors. In this sense, it can be useful also to have perhaps access to information that has been confirmed about our suppliers, that include perhaps privacy and security profiles, information of their certifications, pre-completed assessments, etc. And then thirdly, we must not neglect the possibility of the continuous monitoring of the risk identified by means of those assessments or the exchange network that I just mentioned. And some ideas in this line are, for example, the review of contracts, especially with Schrems 2 and the data transfers to third parties. Now more than ever, it's very important to review our agreements and see if they include sufficient safeguards or measures for the protection of data privacy. And also managing assessments through pre-established workflows that involve perhaps not only your privacy team, but also IT, security teams. So they are more operational and efficient at the end of the day. It is also crucial to have a control of the entire data cycle. We must not only monitor our data processors, but also their subprocessors and ultimately any external providers who have access to the personal data that we are processing throughout all the data cycle. And another recommendation would be to reevaluate your assets and determine perhaps whether it's necessary to process certain personal data or whether a minimization of the processing is possible. And on the other hand, what data could we de-identify or anonymize to be outside of the scope of GDPR? And very much in line with Schrems 2, is also essential to be able to differentiate between secure countries, so those that have adequacy decisions, and unsecure third countries. Also to assess if these third countries provide essentially equivalent levels of protection to the European Union when using perhaps standard contractual clauses or binding corporate rules. And if it's not the case, determine whether you or your processors can implement appropriate technical and organizational measures to protect the personal data. Training your teams is not only important for facilitating a company culture of privacy, but also it is mandated by law under GDPR, CCPA, LGPD, for example. And as more global laws emerge, they will also include requirements for training that should be considered in your privacy programs, especially if you have an international scope. Employees are one of the most common grounds for a breach, and training staff can reduce the risk of breaches. Companies need teams to be privacy aware, as I mentioned at the start, sales, IT, human resources, finance, customer support, etc. And that extends to your employees and the need to be aware of the risk involved in processing the personal data and how to mitigate those risks. Everyone has a critical role to play in protecting your valuable and sensitive information. On the other side, you can build trust with your clients, partners, vendors by letting them know that your teams are trained in handling their data. An example here, for example, dealing with procurement, you might want people knowledgeable across every business unit to be able to answer questions around or understand questions at least around the importance that customers place on privacy and security. And when planning all these training courses addressed to our employees, it would be good to have in mind that they are tailored training, courses based in different roles, that offered in different languages, if that's the case of your organization, that you train your employees under specific legal frameworks that are applied to them, and if you can then customize those trainings with a bit of branding. For example, it's recommendable to offer interactive courses that are not very long, maybe 5-10 minutes long, that are intuitive, that require the attendee engagement. This is very important, and that perhaps also offer a different test at the end of each model. And then around deployment and implementation, it's good that you can also implement it within your own learning management system. So it is it's a less disruptive experience for your employees, that all of them have individual access to these courses. So you can also retrain them anytime or in a defined schedule. And then, of course, not only to focus on their training, but also that you can extract some metrics, some results, that you can generate a custom report, and in the end, that you can also demonstrate compliance with the different privacy training requirements. This is all I had prepared for today for this session. I hope it was interesting. Thanks for watching. Thanks also for IDC Roadshow for inviting me to present it. And well, you can contact me at the email address that appears on the screen, or you can follow also OneTrust España on different social media for similar contact. Thank you very much. Bom dia a todos.